Welcome to Context. I'm Maggie John. Institutional racism is defined as policies, rules, and practices that are embedded in the way an organization or society works. It results in supporting unfair advantage to some and to others unfair or harmful treatment based on race. And after years of denial, 50% of Canadians now say it is a real problem. 2 class action lawsuits are underway against the Government of Canada and underline this problem. More than 600 former and current Black federal employees say they face discrimination and racism at work. And the new class action case was filed last month with 25 Indigenous employees also alleging harassment, discrimination, and racism at federal Indigenous agencies and departments. Nicholas Marcus Thompson and Marcia Banfield-Smith are 2 of the plaintiffs in the Black class action case. And Letitia Wells is one of the plaintiffs in the Indigenous class action lawsuit. They join me now. Nicholas, you are the organizer of this class action lawsuit. What were your experiences especially seeing others as you filed this lawsuit? What were some of the experiences you were hearing?
We heard from employees at the Canadian Human Rights Commission. The commission mandated under the Canadian Human Rights Act to adjudicate on discrimination within our workplace. We heard from Black workers at that commission that the commission was being discriminatory to them as an employees when they made decisions from a race-based perspective, how those decisions were being overturned by their white superiors. We've heard stories from the RCMP, workers from the RCMP to workers that worked on the security detail for the Prime Minister, for successive Prime Ministers. The Black workers across the federal government were facing the same systemic barriers as it pertains to hiring and promotions.
Marcia, you left your job at the Department of Justice earlier this year. You'd been there for 19 years. What made you say enough is enough?
So much for having me. After 19 years of being with the Department of Justice, I had to resign. I felt I was forced to resign because I never once received a promotion. Even though within the 19 years that I was there, I went to law school, I completed law school, I completed my LLB, my Juris Doctorate, and I received not one promotion in 19 years. So I had no choice but to leave the Department of Justice.
And just to clarify, Marcia, were you seeing others, your coworkers, being promoted?
Absolutely. I was seeing my non-Black counterparts being promoted, at least 2 promotions ahead of me, constantly being encouraged, receiving training. None of that was offered to me at all. Even though I always raised concerns and I always put it on my professional performance review that we had twice yearly, and yet I received none of those privileges, those advantages that my non-Black colleagues were receiving. The environment there was less than equitable, and it just at that point I just could not take it anymore. It was just becoming so toxic and just traumatizing, and I just had to leave.
Letitia, you are one of the lead plaintiffs in an Indigenous class action lawsuit. Why did you decide to take legal action?
It was, for me, it was something that grew out of a report that came out from APTN in April. I had no intention of suing the government. My intent was to walk away in peace. But unfortunately, there's been too much harm to echo off the lawsuit that we just heard from. No promotions. So I've carried that research for about 3 years that I was within the government internally. And the collection of the stories, no promotions, entry-level positions, no movement up, racial language. And so what prompted me to step up to this lawsuit is it needs to be done for change because the racism is built within the Constitution. If the Constitution was to have be a living being, if you were to look at it as a spiritual and a living being, it would be a serpent. And that is my whole purpose of stepping up, is because of the toxicness and poisonous that we feel as employees, and we have the right to equitable resources and promotions.
Wow, to call it a serpent, that means that you're living in a, as you said, toxic environment. You're not alone in your experiences. So far, 25 current and former employees have come forward. You describe an atmosphere so painful that colleagues even contemplated suicide. Explain
Yes.
this to me.
There was a time for confidentiality reasons, I can't mention names, but I was one of the people at the table, that there was a discussion of suicide, that maybe one of us should sacrifice our lives to be heard internally, because we are in a position that we're being traumatized, we're being triggered, we're being assaulted. And we don't feel good about that. And as single mothers, many of us rely on our income. So they use the income to control us. And some of them are very targeted attacks. And so because we felt stuck, we had no way out, if we leave, we risk the federal government's welfare department coming after our children. We have to stay for that income. So it's a very terrible situation to be in. And it's very scary to step forth in something like this when it comes to your mentality, because Western society will deem you not fit. It's not about what's wrong with us. It's about what's happened to us.
Yeah, and this is a perfect example of institutional racism, right? So you're not just talking about losing your job, you're talking about losing your children because of issues within the justice system and within the social work system. There are so many different layers and complexities to this issue. Nicholas, this class action covers 5 decades of employees. The institutional racism runs deep. What would you like to see so that the next generation isn't going through what you and other people in the lawsuit are going through?
Well, what we are seeking to do is to eliminate those barriers that prevent Black workers from having those economic opportunities for hiring and promotions at the top levels of Canada's public service. We're seeking accountability measures because we understand that we cannot allow those who have benefited, those who've thrived from systemic discrimination to now be responsible for policing those efforts. We're seeking to have equal representation throughout the entire public service at all levels of the public service, not just entry-level positions. We're seeking to have representation in mid-level management and in executive position. Presently, the publics in the federal public service, Black workers are reserved for the bottom of the public service. So there is a glass ceiling at the bottom of the public service. Some visible minorities are able to get just above that glass ceiling, and the top of the public service is reserved for white folks. And those are the facts. And those facts have led to a lot of injuries, and we're seeking to prevent those injuries from continuing by ensuring that our public service is inclusive.
All right, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you again, Nicholas, Marcia, and Letitia, for your time today. We will be following this story. Thank you again. Context reached out to the Deputy Minister of Inclusion and Diversity to discuss her work and the progress the government has made on inclusion. She declined our interview request. Coming up, how does one deal internally with racism in the workplace? It's called racial trauma, and some experts say it is a condition that's on the rise. Psychotherapist Roxanne Francis will explain.